I believe you've been listening to Jen for the last few, so this I'm a little bit of a change up. For those of you that are new to PROergonomics and new to our webinars, we are an ergonomics specialty consulting company that specializes in risk assessments, physical demands assessments, training, and just overall kind of ergonomic development improvement within your facility. So we actually are very proud to say that all of our consultants are registered kinesiologists or certified ergonomists and have a very reputable reputation. So with further ado, no, there's going to be some ado. Hold on, I just got to... So this month's webinar is going to be poetry in the workplace. And when we say poetry, what we're really saying is POET, which is a short form for post-offer employment testing. It is a relatively old approach to hiring. However, it is an ongoing controversial one. So today in our session, we're kind of going to be just looking at some of the differences between the two types of screening that we'll often see in the workplace and asking questions about whether or not a POET type program is going to be a really good fit for you. We want to make sure that you're understanding all the considerations that are involved, because as I said, it can be a complicated political process that involves legalities in some cases. We will then kind of go into what are the three main steps that you need to develop an effective program and how that's going to impact your work or business and what the results you should be expecting to see. And lastly, we will be looking at a little bit of the legal considerations and some of the case precedents that's been coming up just over the last few years. So when we look at what is a post-offer employment testing, really what we are looking at is a battery of tests. And this battery of tests are going to very closely, ideally, and I will say that ideally, replicate the physical demands and the essential duties of the job. And you will hear me say essential duties repeatedly throughout this session because it really becomes a big part of whether or not you should be doing a POET, if you are doing it legally, if you are doing it correctly, and without discrimination to any of the potential hires coming in. So determining the employee's suitability is always going to be a conversation of those bona fide essential duties. And ideally what we're coming to is that if we have an employee that is a good fit physically for the essential duties that we have in the position, then we offer an opportunity to potentially have less impact on our musculoskeletal disorder claims that may arrive in the future. Because at the end of the day, what we are always looking for is kind of a social responsibility where we do not, injure our workers and we don't have those additional costs and claims and time management required to manage those claims. So there's a couple of differences between kind of some of the physical screening that some organizations may do and post-offer. The first and foremost is when you can do them and how, whether or not the individual or the potential hire candidate has been hired or not. In some of your physical screenings, you will, upon hiring them, you will take them through various tests or requirements. The job offer is not necessarily linked to the bona fide essential duties. They may be related to other policies or procedures within the workplace. So what we're talking about in the physical screening is sometimes we will see eye testing or hearing testing or drug testing. We have pharmaceutical clients that will ensure that the antibodies in the blood system before they go work in the lab are high enough so that they're not endangering them. However, at no point are the results of these tests impacting whether or not the individual is hired or not. It's basically part of their personnel file, and it's there for potentially monitoring to ensure that our safety program in other areas is robust, or it may be linked to human resources or other areas where it's an information gathering process that you need based on the policies or procedures that you have in your organization. So the key thing is the physical screening you're doing does not necessarily stop the person from getting the job. Whereas a post-offer employment testing, basically the way they work is you would have to go through your entire hiring process beforehand, ensure that from an HR perspective, from an organizational perspective, that they are a good fit and that you do want to hire this person. You would then offer the position conditional upon passing the post-offer employment testing screening program. So this is where you may find, as far as the politics and the legalities go in discrimination, that you do need to make sure that we have our ducks in a row and that we are doing this effectively. So because that person's opportunity for employment is connected and correlated to their results on the POET. And this is going to be a battery, as I said, of physical tests. So we're not looking at necessarily the blood work or the hearing or eyes. We are looking at whether or not, from a musculoskeletal standpoint, are they physically, and when I say fit, I don't necessarily mean fit as in are we fit to go to the gym. I mean, is it a good fit for this person based on their size, their stature, their past history, going to be able to do the essential duties of the job? And if they're not, then it's not necessarily a good fit overall as an employee candidate. From my experience in doing these over the years, it has been twofold. It's actually been a really great opportunity for employees, potential employees or potential hire candidates, in that it has given them an opportunity to glimpse the job and kind of test out the job prior to going in and doing it. And I've actually had people after the testing who have passed the test said, there is no way I want to do this every day. This is not the job for me. So it's not necessarily just an opportunity for the organization to go through kind of a screening process, but it also allows the employee candidate to kind of also screen the physical demands that they would be doing and determine on their end whether or not they feel that it is going to be that job fit that we're always looking for. So why would we want to do these? We've touched on a few of the items already. First of all, we've talked about fit. When we look at hiring, we're always looking for a really good fit with our candidates. We want the personality to be there that goes with our organization so that matches with our culture. We want the skills and the technical ability to go there to match the qualifications of the job. So it makes perfect sense that we would also ask for the person's physical abilities to match what the essential duties of the job require. So it really is a way of rounding out and creating that more robust interviewing screening process for, is this candidate a good fit for our organization? And it's really just looking at trying to determine if the physical abilities of the individual are able to match the job demands of the position. If we're able to do this, if we have the right people doing the job, then the hope is, and statistically our clients at least have experienced this, is that there is an ability to lower your workplace musculoskeletal disorder type injuries. So we've also found that at times, specifically for clients that we've been, using this program over several years, it's also highlighted areas where we have MSD hazards, and we should be looking at, more of a risk assessment or internal improvement process, because we are restricting our hiring pool so much because of the physical demands being so high. So it has an ability to integrate into your health and safety program as well, and highlight some of those areas that are actually hindering you, not only from a claims and WSIB perspective, but also from a hiring perspective as well. And at the end of the day, if you are identifying those hazards ahead of time and you're being proactive in this way where injuries have not happened, but we understand that the demand or the physical demands of the job are high, then it always opens those doors for ergonomic improvement and implementation of controls and overall, lowering of the physical job demands so that we're able to, again, double up on that lower injuries and increase the amount of potential hiring candidates that would be interested in the job. When we're looking at why our MSDs are still the #1 injury, we have found that they have come down over the last, I would say, 20 years. When I first started in this industry, we were looking at injury rates above 50%, and I believe right now we have injury rates below 50 in the 42s, 43%, and even into 38, depending on what sector or sector you are. So when we're looking at some of the characteristics, we have men representing 61% of all of our lost time claims, which is an interesting statistic considering most people feel that poets potentially have the opportunity to discriminate or screen against females. It's interesting to note that it's actually men that are the higher MSD injury claim as far as the WSIB statistics go. Ages are 25 to 44, which is again another interesting statistics, specifically since one of the other reasons that people may be interested or looking into doing poets in their organization is the growing aging workforce. And there's nothing wrong with having an aging workforce. There's tons of benefits to that. However, one of the ongoing concerns is that physical ability and capability component, and whether or not they are able to perform the same physical demands that they were able to do, in their 20s. So again, interesting to note that 25 to 44 is actually our age range that we're looking at for most work-related work injuries, specifically in the MSD section. Low back being our #1 body part. And when we're looking at motor vehicle and transit drivers being of the highest, however, when I say the highest, that percentage is still 7.4%. So it's obviously just eking out other areas, but still a point of interest. So before we get into the how-tos, it's important to kind of start asking yourself, if this is the path we're going to go down, how is that going to impact us? And for a lot of our clients that specifically right now, I'm not sure if everyone is feeling this, but it's definitely a trend that I've been hearing through the organizations that we work with. Poets decrease the pool of potential hires. That is, in its essence, what it is intending to do. However, if you are struggling on trying to get anybody in your doors based on hiring practices, then a poet is really only going to hinder. And the reason being is one of the fundamental key factors that you need to understand with a poet screening process is that it has to be consistent. You can't pick and choose who goes through a poet and who doesn't. So, we can't take a little bit of a hiatus or a break from doing our poets when our candidate pool's not there, because that's when you open the doors to potential discrimination and human rights issues. And then that becomes where the program and the system isn't fair, and it's just not something you're going to be able to argue yourself out of. So at the end of the day, poets can be a great program addition to health and safety and finding that right candidate. However, if your organization is struggling with firing new hires to begin with, this may be something you want to hold off on. If you have low MSD statistics, again, this may not be something that's going to really show an improvement, and it may actually just delay processes because it is one more step in the hiring system that you need to make sure is done before the person can actually start their first day of work. If your MSD statistics are not showing that there's really a high rate of them, then there may not be any need to kind of go about looking at implementing a program such as this. You definitely want to kind of review your MSD statistics and look at what are some of the causes. If your causes of your MSDs are, I'm trying to think of an example, but depending on what the causes are, they may not be something that you're going to be able to capture in a POET, so that we're not able to actually say that, okay, well, this because it's this hazard. For instance, you know, we talked about transit driving. In a POET, we're not going to be able to replicate or the long-term vibrational effect of transit drivers. It's just not something we're able to do in a time span that we need to do it in. Lots of other tests we can kind of speed up or increase the demand to kind of show an accelerated physical response from the body, but that's not going to be one of them. So if your cause is, you know, long hours, whole body vibration from a truck, a POET may not be the solution, because it's not going to screen anyone out, because for the hour or whatever that you're going to put them through the testing process, it's not going to highlight any muscular deficiencies or inability to do the job. We have a lot of clients that kind of go through and they want to know if this is something we can do in-house or they can do in-house internally, and that's really where you need to have a conversation with the resources that you have with your legal team and sit down and ask yourself, do we want that in-house liability? With our testing, and with most of the testing that I'm aware of anyways, the results of the tests are simply reported as a pass-fail. So there is no one within the organization that really knows the exact points or issues that the individual has. They just know that elements of the test were not passed and elements of they were. So they don't know their, let's say, their grip strength. They won't know their blood pressure. They won't know their heart rate as they went through this certain process. So there's not an opportunity for anyone to say, oh, well, you hired this person over me because they had a higher grip strength. Higher grip strength isn't really the question. The question is, do you have the grip strength needed? And if you can say yes to that question, then just because you can squeeze double that does not make you a better candidate. So, however, having that information in-house sometimes can open doors to have that conversation of discrimination, because potential hires that did not get hired may feel that you were picking and choosing your candidate based on the results that you were seeing come through. The other aspect of the in-house, we actually kind of in a roundabout way, we often, in fact, in all cases, do our testing in-house. We are not a clinic. We do not have a clinic set up, and based on the philosophy and the intent of the POET screening program, we like to work within as much familiarity of the actual job as we possibly can. So if we can actually get the person in the facility working with the actual equipment on the actual line, or at least a simulation thereof, then there is less areas or opportunity for legal implications to come back and come around. And then there is that whole legal implications. There's lots of times where we are constantly going back with our clients, going over, you know, can we ask this question? Can we do this? What can we do? And it's a three-part conversation where the organization, ourselves, and the lawyers all kind of sit and have a discussion on how to ensure that legally we have kind of covered off some of our main bases. So all of these are just things to consider. It is not something that we push on our clients. It has to be a fit for the organization themselves. Specifically, if you are seeing really high MSDs and you're just seeing your turnover rate going over because people are getting injured, then the question is specifically in areas such as automotive and manufacturing, where their hiring pool often has come from automotive and manufacturing, they may be bringing injuries in that may or at least a lower physical capacity they maybe have had because of previous jobs that they've experienced, and they may not be yours. So the POET does offer an opportunity that you may be able to screen some of those things out so that you are not necessarily, I guess, on the hook, for lack of a better word, for injuries that you did not cause. So when we're looking at kind of how are we developing them, the first and foremost thing we will tell all of our clients, and anyone who asks for that matter, is, do you have your physical demands analysis completed? In some cases, they have, and they've been out of date, and in some cases they haven't. The reason a physical demands analysis really rounds out, and I'm not saying we've used them at all times, we have always gone through a process of clearly identifying the essential duties of the position, but in areas where, let's say, the new hire could go to any number of entry-level jobs, that may not be a program or a process that every client wants to take on right away. But regardless of whether you want to do the physical demands analysis, which really locks down your documentation side of that essential duty question, whether or not you do that process or not, you still have to go through some form of assessment to ensure that you are identifying the essential duties of the position. And when we're talking about essential duties, we're talking about bona fide essential duties, which means that just because that's the way the job sits currently, we need to show that, this has to happen in order for this job to be completed. So if there's another way to do it, for instance, if we could manufacture parts with our feet, then we have no right asking specifically of the hand. And that becomes a really big conversation. And for most of us out here, that don't deal in the world of POET and ergonomics and hiring practices, we're very familiar with the screening processes through the police system, the firefighters, and some of those emergency services. And part of the questions that's coming up, and we'll talk about them in a bit, is, are the test elements actually capturing or accurately capturing the essential duties of the job? So for instance, if you are working on an assembly line, there is no way that you could test for, let's say, the fitness run 8-minute mile. There's no reason why someone would ever have to run an 8-minute mile while working on an assembly line. So you have no right as an employer to actually go through that testing process to determine if they are appropriate hire or not. Yes, that may give you great information on cardiovascular and physical fitness, but it is not an essential duty of the job, so therefore we cannot test on it. So you definitely need to spend some time documenting those essential duties of any position that you would putting the new hire in that you're trying to screen for. We need to make sure that the data points of those essential duties are robust. So we can't just say, yes, they have to lift and take them through random lifting. That's not going to be effective. It's also going to be very time consuming if you have a lot of parts, specifically if you're not using weights that are actually essential to the duties required. So when we're talking about lifting, we should know how often they're lifting. We should know what weight they're lifting. We should know from what height to what height and how far away from the body they're lifting, so that when we go into developing those battery of tests, all of that data gets embedded into that test to, again, mimic the essential duties of the job. Again, it closes the gaps for dispute, that we're asking elements of the job that are not required. So, and we want them to be, those elements and those data points to be objective. So again, we will see often in a lot of job descriptions, heavy lifting required. Okay, well, heavy lifting for me and heavy lifting for my husband are two entirely different things, and that is a subjective heading. And even if you were to go into kind of a classifications of what heavy means, you're still looking at a weight range that may not reflect the weight range of the job that you're looking to screen. So you need those numbers to be accurate, you need them to be detailed, but you also need them to be objective. So that's the first thing. You really need to source out all of that information to ensure that we're able to not just get a really good program, but stop some of the issues going down the lines that often come up with these types of politically sensitive systems that we're asking to develop. So we've talked about the tests having to replicate the task requirements. How are we going to do that? We are going to use your stuff. That is essentially how we're going to do that. It's not to say, you can see in the picture that I have here, this would be a POET that is being done in a clinical setting, and you can see that they have different setups here. So, but they are still looking to mimic the task requirements. So the platform that they have here is height adjustable, so that they would ideally, if they're doing it correctly, set the height to reflect the same height as, let's say, maybe the conveyor line or the pallet that's on the floor or the assembly table, or even a drainage lip in a bathroom or custodial area. However you're going to be going about this, your heights, your measurements, your equipments, your weights, the more of it you can use from your actual job, the better your environment is going to reflect the task, and the better you're going to be at mimicking the job itself. The question that you need to ask, and we'll talk about why later, but you need to make sure that we are not asking things that could be accommodated out. So for instance, if we are looking at, let's say we were going to screen for our office administration, and we've identified that the heaviest thing that they are going to have to lift is, the big box of paper that comes in from Staples. And we put that into our POET. That would open a door for conversation, because the employee doesn't actually physically have to lift that entire box. Her job layout, the hours she works, the system that's in place would allow her to hand bomb reams of paper out of that, so that she could lower the weight. So that's what I'm talking about when I say we can't necessarily say, oh, well, the heaviest thing you have to lift is a box of paper. Let's test on a box of paper. We always need to come back and ask the question, is there a work method or a strategy or, something we could do that could act to accommodate this element or physical element of the job? And if there is, then we cannot test on it, and it would not stand up in a court of law. So now we get into, we've done our pre-work, we've identified the essential duties, we have all our data points, we have all of everything we want in place. We've now developed the test as we see fit, and that doesn't need to be necessarily as hard as it sounds. I'm not going to say it's not challenging, depending on your work practice, trying to figure out a way of speeding up the muscular effect to fatigue the muscles accurately can sometimes be a little bit of a thought process and a kind of going back and forth. But at the end of the day, if you're replicating the job, you know what needs to happen. Now you just need to figure out how are we going to put it in the confines of a testing scenario. But now we're getting into the fact where we've put all of these points in place, and we now need to determine, oh, we have a typo there, I apologize for that, whether or not the person is going to be able to pass or fail. So our process in this has been to try whenever possible, and it does have a fairly good success rate, is to trial the tests that we've developed on the employees currently working. So what we will have done is we will come up with a bit of a questionnaire that they will fill out, so we will be aware of any injuries that they may have had. Ideally, we want to test able-bodied people that have not experienced an injury, but for all of you that are in the workplace and understand the physicality of your work, sometimes that can be very challenging and not easy to do. But we do want a fairly good sample size in order to be able to determine our cutoffs. But it would allow you then to allow the current employees not just to go through the tests themselves and give you feedback, but also get on board with the program. And that can be important too, because if there is a feeling that internally the politics are off, internally your employees don't think that this should be happening, and because they're unsure of why you're doing it, or what's actually being recalled, or maybe they don't feel you understand what they do well enough to be testing on it. There's been lots of barriers internally of why someone may want to do a POET program. The trialing of their own employees has always, and I literally mean always, we've not had an instance where it hasn't come out to be a very positive experience for everybody. And it's just a fabulous fact-finding mission. We have had, we did POET screenings for the paramedic community, and they loved all of the battery of tests that we put together. They felt they simulated and replicated exactly what they do. However, their feedback to us was the weight is not high enough. We had taken, kind of average anthropometric body weights for a certain age group, and they were like, that is not our demographic. Our demographic is the unwell, and they typically are heavier individuals. So and they were saying that their number one call was actually someone who had lost consciousness actually in the bathroom. So you were talking tight, confined spaces. We weren't necessarily always able to do two-person lifts because only one person was able to get in there. So the weight requirement was something that they felt was vastly underrepresented in the POET protocol and did not represent the physicality of the job. So once we increased it, we had a few, not everybody, but a few volunteers go through and retake it, and their feedback was, yes, this is an excellent test, and they were very excited about the process. And then what we were able to do is take their biophysical readings, and when I say biophysical, their heart rates, their grip strengths, their their force measurements, and be able to determine what kind of statistical analysis we had. Where was our maxes, our mins, our average? Were the people that were struggling, were they the same people that were reporting an injury or physical limitation? And if that was the case, then we were really able to show a very rational, methodical way of picking a pass or fail. In some cases, they didn't necessarily all come from the employees themselves. We will always also fall back to, research and everything we know about the human body and the physiology and the biophysical measurements that we know from the fitness setting and other work environments where they've actually done very in-depth, massive studies. We kind of cross-compare the two and make sure that based on what research is saying, based on what the internal employees' results are saying, these are the test results we feel are going to get the biggest kind of success rate, I guess, for them to be successful in their jobs. The other thing we need to just look at, so we have our data, we have our tests, we have our pass-fail. We then need to make sure, are the tests repeatable? And this is sometimes a bit of a challenge that we've found. I know from past experiences, one of the big issues that we've experienced is an element that has nothing to do with the job and has everything to do with the hiring practice, and that is anxiety. So we've had people that from their biophysical readings were failing their tests before they even started. So one of the things that we've found is our ability to be successful with the candidate really has come down to all of us that do the screening having the same rapport, the same description, the same instruction, definitely the same setup, the same equipment, the same environment, but just being able to each mimic kind of almost ourselves in that we're able to just bring down that anxiety level as best we can. And whether that be knowing that, we read out the consent form that is developed to kind of give the person time to just kind of breathe and not just kind of stay in their head rather than just listening to our voice while we go through. But it is something that can be challenging based on who's doing the test. It's hard to say, you know, if I have a very, very calming demeanor and the person who tests, you know, aside from me is very excitable and very, you know, go-getter kind of a personality, that may impact the person's biophysical readings when it comes to anxiety. And it's definitely something that we definitely can't normalize out, because to each his own, we're all going to react differently. However, it's something to consider and something to think about, because I can definitely say over 20 years, I have seen testers that excelled, and I have seen testers that almost kind of just make the scenario worse for the candidate. So looking at to make sure that everything is done the same way. The repeatability also comes into play, not just getting good results from the candidate, but it needs to be a component legally. It needs to be there for you to be able to say that exactly the same thing was said, exactly the same thing was done for each candidate in the instructions and in the execution. Because someone says, oh, well, if someone had said that to me, then that would have been much easier, and I could have done that easier, and I probably would have got the job. That's a problem. So making sure that when you put the program through, that repeatability aspect is key. So when we're looking at kind of the legal side of this and some of those considerations, we just talked about repeatability, and we've talked briefly about accommodations. So going through the physical demands and determining what would be work method, what is something that you're seeing people are doing. For instance, if you think, oh, well, this person's twisting and turning all the time, I need to test on that. But if you were to push back, let's say the table, the pallet, the cart, whatever it is that they're twisting and turning to, 2 feet, which would require someone to take a step, now all of a sudden that twisting and turning is not an essential duty. It is a work method issue, and it is something that we can actually build out of the process. And we should actually, from an ergonomic standpoint, we definitely should build that out of the process, but that's a different webinar altogether. So taking the time, make sure those accommodation elements are locked down, because that is one of the areas that has been opened up legally and has case precedent in currently. We need to show the validity. So why are we testing on every aspect that we're testing? Why are we taking heart rate? Why are we taking grip strength? Why are we asking them to lift 60 pounds? Why are we asking them to grip 120 times in 2 minutes? Whatever the test looks like, there should be a very sound, objective, methodical way of explaining why we're doing this, and it should all come back to the bona fide essential duties of the job. So that we can say, this test is valid because A, B, and C, and there's no really if, ands, or buts about it. And then there's the reliability of the test. How are you going to be able to make sure that it is happening the same way every time? And often this is somewhere where the allure of the clinic definitely can come in, because it is a much more in the box way of doing physical screening or testing. However, we then open questions of, you know, are we actually using the right equipment at the right heights, because it isn't actually in the environment that the job actually occurs. So what we'll often have, and at least I believe with all of our clients that are doing it anyways, I don't think anyone doesn't, is they have a kit. And you know, often sometimes it's rework products that are exactly the right way, and they are in a bin for me when I go in, and I use the exact same products every time. So I'm not necessarily like, oh, we're not running that product today. We've got this one that's, you know, 10 grams more. Well, that doesn't seem much, but in a court of law, as soon as you show inconsistency in the practice, you show inconsistency in the program, and likely a negative result at the end of those proceedings. So having a kit, if you're going to do it internally, it is something that we recommend based on just those environmental factors, but it is need to be thought out that what are we going to use? Are we going to use the same things every time, and how we're going to do that appropriately? Timelines often also come into play. We can't typically spend 8 hours per candidate testing them. I mean, the results would be great. However, from a cost perspective, from a hiring perspective, from the employees, respective the potential employee candidate's time, it needs to be kind of somewhat curtailed to a reasonable timeline. Typically, ours take about an hour, I would say, and that's from start to finish. So that's, going through the consent form, getting the baseline data, taking them through the battery of tests, as well as doing any post data assessments we need to do, and typically an hour is what we're looking for. So if you're having some that go an hour and some that go an hour and a half, again, that comes back into the reliability, the validity, and the repeatability of your test is not quite there. So there have been a couple of case precedents in the past. One was with the school board, and the union and the failed potential hire took the issue to court, and what the ruling was is the potential hire didn't meet your reach requirement. So it was a custodial position, and basically their stock, their tissues, their cleaning supplies, all of those types of things were in a stock room, and the testing protocol required them to be able to reach to a certain height so that they could gain access to the stock in the room. The judge's ruling is that height is not an essential duty in this case. It is not. It's not the product that they're manufacturing. It's not like, okay, well, they need to be able to reach this because this is the height of the cylinder tank that we're actually welding or creating. This was something that the judge felt could easily be moved or lowered or reorganized to allow that vertical height requirement to be not a part of a screening process. So that's where that accommodation point comes in, and needing to make sure that your essential duties are truly essential to the job and not just how the job is occurring currently. The next one is one that actually was, I just read it, so it was kind of nice for me as far as the slide goes. Oh, I think we went backwards, sorry. Nope, I guess not. Sorry, just hold on one second. Okay, so the one that just came out was actually in Saskatchewan, and it was with the firefighters, and what they actually were contesting was that the firefighting test protocol, which is quite a standardized process, I'll say, is actually discriminating against females and older potential hires. And the ruling came out that due to the fact that they were not able to show that every element of the test accurately reflected the essential duties of the job, and they had statements from current employees substantiating that not every element could be tied into the tasks that they were doing, that it was an inflated test and therefore was specifically designed to screen females and older potential hires. That being said, that's definitely, an area of concern and is always going to be legally something that you need to wrap your head around and make sure that when you're going through this process that we're not doing that. However, in my experience, I have to say, after screening I don't know how many hundreds of potential candidates, I have learned not to judge a book by its cover, shall we say. I've had women, 5 foot and 100 pounds, maybe soaking wet, have results that, beat a whole day's worth of heavy, fitness buff men type thing that you know, just floored me. I have had a 75-year-old woman haul around, you know, 80-pound bags of dextrose like it was a feather pillow. And so it is definitely something that, yes, we do need to make sure that we are not discriminating. However, from the tester's side, I have to say that I am always amazed at the human capacity and how often we make judgments and they are so not correct. So it's also kind of gone the other way, but that's neither here nor there. So in this respect, one is really speaking to making sure that your essential duties, well, both actually are just making sure that those essential duties truly are essential to the job, that there is no other way that you could do the work without doing these physical elements. And I think if you're able to do that, then both of these cases would have fallen through and not have gotten any traction. So something to think about there when you're kind of going through, because that is sometimes the hardest part. And from an internal perspective, you know, as an ergonomist, sometimes I can see things right away that I'm like, no, that's not something we need to test on. But as far as the opportunity and what could change, that is something that you internally would maybe know better than a consultant or someone outside the clinic, and really need to be involved in that part of the process to ensure that, you know, I may not realize that, you know, changing the heights of the shelves, that's kind of a loose example, could be lowered, and that may be something to be like, oh no, we do that all the time. That's not a problem. So definitely making sure that that element of your process is tight. The last real aspect that needs to be looked at is the opportunity for review. And it's something that going forward, I would almost want to even state in the report somewhere, because there are certain standards, or not standards, I guess just data points that you're going to want to make sure are happening. Otherwise, you need to ask yourself, why are we doing this? Because it is a financial expense, it is a time draw, it does decrease your hiring pool. So although it has lots of positive elements in the long run, both from an ergonomic standpoint, from a hiring standpoint, from getting a really good fit from the employee candidate that you're hiring, if you're not getting what you need out of it, then that becomes a problem. And if you are not reviewing the program, you are not going to know if you are getting what you need out of it. So I would encourage anyone who is or has been doing these to, if they haven't reviewed the process, now would be a good time to start looking at that. What is your failure rate? Ideally, we want to, I almost don't want to put a percentage in there, but ideally, studies have shown, I would say our results also have shown, our failure rate is anywhere between 10 and 20%. Some of our really, really physical jobs, they may be hitting up closer to a 30%, but they are extremely physical. And it's understandable that we're going to have a higher failure rate in those regards. But if your failure rate is 1 or 2%, then you are putting a lot of effort and time and money into a program that's letting 99% of your candidates through and may not be doing what you need it to do. When you look through your injury statistics, are your injuries actually going down? Is another question that we encourage our clients to ask and review when they start after, you know, maybe a year of doing these. So what we have found in that process is sometimes they're able to say, yes, their injuries are going through in these areas. So for instance, the job is doing really well for screening for back, shoulder, and wrist, but we found that the element that still remains is elbow. So it begs the question, is our test actually testing the elbow element from a physical standpoint in the POET screening? So it allows us to kind of have an opportunity to review what are we doing for the elbow, because this is the area we are still continuing to see injuries, whereas everything else has decreased. And that's happened for 2 of my clients that I've had over the years. So it has highlighted an area that maybe we were not screening intensely enough. it also, this one almost should be first, not third, is the process or element relevant? Are the physical demands up to date? Jobs change. New technology gets brought in, new elements get kind of sourced out, and the physical demands are going to change, or the essential duties are going to change with that. And if we are testing on things that are no longer relevant in the job, then legally we have a huge hole that we have opened up. So that needs to be an ongoing thing, is whenever the job change, whether it be, let's take our custodian that we've kind of been talking about. Let's say we've changed out all the mop buckets and they are now a plug in the bottom. We no longer pick them up. It's, in fact, we even have a policy on it that says we are not picking them up. Then my POET screening better not have a 68-pound lift of a mop bucket. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we just constantly need to be reviewing some of those tests to make sure that they are still relevant to the job that we're doing today. And has there been improvements, or still is there, as technology increases or as our opportunities expand, and what we can do to improve the job, because hopefully that's happening simultaneously. Ergonomic improvement should ideally always be going on. And if it is, again, we may have opportunities for accommodation that we didn't have when we initially designed the tests. And again, those elements should be either included or excluded depending on how that reflects the job itself. So the review really becomes our key piece, not only to tightening up the physical screening tests that you're actually doing, and not only tightening up the legalities that may come out of this, but just offering an opportunity to kind of ensure that the rationale of why we started doing this is still true and holds up today, and that it is being effective. Because, we'll be the first to say that there is a time commitment and financial commitment to doing this, and if it's not getting you the results, then we beg the question, why are you doing it? All right, and that's kind of, I think, let's see, I got 8 minutes. So we have Julie online. So if you guys do have any questions, you can post them in the questions section. I can try and answer some of them now if they come up. If not, I will usually try and go back afterwards, and any questions that we weren't able to answer, we will send out kind of a broadcast email to everyone who attended, letting them know what the question was and what our response is. But at the end of the day, that rounds out this month's webinar on POET testing, and we would very much enjoy to see all of you with us next month when we're starting to look at aging in the workforce means greater need for ergonomics. It's something that kind of was a really, really hot topic, I would say 3-4 years ago, and then it kind of went dormant with a lot of the political change that's been going on in some of our legislation. It kind of got lost. And I would say in the last 6 months, I want to say at least maybe a dozen clients have mentioned it in passing, that aging workforce is starting to kind of either is still on their radar but is now moved up to more of a priority again, or is coming up on their radar where it hasn't before. So it's going to be a great topic, and we look forward to having you and seeing you there. And that is it for today. You guys, thank you very much for your time. You have a great day, and we look forward to hearing from you.